Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We cannot wait to get started. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists. To get started, for Ask Me Anything about techniques I use for conversation design and development. So, first we have Brenda. Brenda has been designing conversations for nearly 15 years. She's a mathematician by training and is an expert in VUI design and NLU analysis. Currently, she designs and builds marketing sales chatbots for the full suite of products at LogMeIn. Thanks for joining us today, Brenda. Next up, we have Amanda. Amanda Stevens is the Director of Conversation Design at Master of Code Global. She is responsible for managing the conversation design team, processes, training, hiring, and onboarding new talent. She also continues to conversation design and consult for MOC's large and enterprise level clients. Thank you, Amanda. I'm so glad you're joining us today. All right, and we have Sarah Storm. Sarah is a multimodal storyteller who pairs her expertise in the performing arts and podcasting worlds with voice-first solutions. She is obsessed with conversation as a medium, and this bears out in her work. She currently serves as Boom Integrated's Head of Ideation and Conversation Design. Boom's new skill, Mood Magic, is now available to play on Alexa. It aims to keep kids entertained and active while boosting EQ. With Boom, Sarah also directed and co-produced season 3 of the Webby-winning Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, the podcast. With Airplay, Sarah also cast, directed, and voice-produced characters for the Webby-winning Mr. Robot skill, the Daily 5-9. Occasionally, she appears on your TV. Thank you, Sarah. All right, and next we have Micah. After working as a technical writer at Dutch Air Traffic Control for 14 years and a brief stint as a requirement analyst, Micah switched careers and entered the exciting world of chatbots and voice assistants. In February 2020, she founded Convocat Conversational Expertise. She now coaches writers on how to create chatbots and voice assistants that are actually helpful. In addition, she works as a consultant for chatbot platform suppliers, advising them on how to improve the user experience for chatbot writers, create great onboarding, and write end-user documentation like a pro. Micah started the Dutch chapter of Women in Voice, an international movement that aims to empower women that work in conversational technology, conversation designers, linguists, developers, and UX designers, by giving them a platform to speak and making them visible in leadership positions. Thank you for joining us, Micah. And last but definitely not least, Anna McKenzie is a software engineer who is dedicated to improving parental leave policies in tech, as well as teaching women to code. She is currently working at Myplanet, a software studio that specializes in building voice experiences. She is the co-author of The Expecting Playbook, a book that helps startups of all sizes to roll out supportive parental leave policies. Her follow-up book, titled The Parental Playbook, provides startups with the necessary tools to support parents upon their return to work. In 2018, Anna was named one of the top 25 women of influence in Canada, as well as one of the top 30 women in tech making a difference by the DMZ. Thank you so much, Anna. All right, and in the chat, thank you so much for all the greetings. And if everyone would like to type in where they're tuning in from, that would be awesome. And anything about your background you'd like to share as well, how much experience you have in conversation design or development, that would be great. And without further ado, let's get started with the questions. So this first one, everyone expressed interest in. Brenda, if you would like to start us off. Is a conversational flow ever finished? Should it always be iterated upon? And how do you know when it's done?
This is a good one. You're never done. However, you do get to the point where tuning your application will improve your metrics less and less. So even then, you should still periodically review your system to make sure that it still is meeting the goals, that it's still the scope hasn't changed, that the answers to the questions haven't changed. Has the product team changed the way a certain feature is handled? The bot should keep up with the correct answers. So you still need to review, even if your bot is excellent, you still need to keep up with that kind of thing. But yeah, it's never really done.
Thanks, Brenda. Amanda, want to join?
About that. Exactly like Brenda said, it's an iteration, just like our other digital assets out there. You're always going to update a website. You're always just like that. You're always going to want to update your bot. But just to answer the question in a different way for those watching, this question might speak to if you're building a bot for the first time or you're building out a use case for the first time. How do you know if it's finished? How do you know it's ready to launch? So some insights from that perspective is, does the design complete the task? Once you finish the design for this use case, does it do everything you want to do? And another piece to look at is, have you accounted for all the different edge cases that could occur? Is there error handling every step of the way? If a user falls out of that specific flow, do they have the ability to get back in? Also, conduct user testing. And from those results, if you've ticked all the boxes there, then I would say the conversational flow is done, ready to launch, and for you to watch and learn and bot tune from there.
Sarah, do you want to join in?
But yeah, I think it's hard. It can be hard from a creative perspective to let go. And I think the maxim, like the perfect is the enemy of done, helps me sometimes. Like I always want to change and tweak, but at a certain point, you do have to be willing to put it aside. And as Amanda said, like put it out there, let it get tested, see what happens from there. So yeah.
And Anna.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer it from a development perspective, but very similar to the answers that have already been shared. I mean, the primary purpose when you're designing something is to get the user to reach fulfillment. So whatever you determine fulfillment is, if they're reaching that for this iteration of this intent, you can consider it done if they are getting to the fulfillment and there is error handling and no response catches, et cetera, along the way. But in terms of the conversational flow ever being done, no, it's never done because there's always different kinds of intents that you can add in. And you're going to have those ideas and want to add that stuff in and realize what you missed once you start seeing what users are actually saying to your skill or action or bot or whatever it is.
And Micah.
I'd like to add, and that's the maintenance not only of your flows, but also of your responses and whether they're accurate and up to date. And if there's one thing that COVID-19 told us, that it's the user trust is really dependent on how up to date your information is. And in COVID-19 situation, this could change like every other day. So that's also a very important aspect to monitor and to make sure that you actually have a team in place that maintains your content for proper and correct information. That's always up to date.
And that was everyone, right? I'm not missing anyone. Moving on to the second question. How do you balance business goals of your company, like customer acquisition or conversion, with designing empathetic conversations? Brenda, do you want to start us off? And then Amanda and Sarah?
Sure. This one's a little tricky. You absolutely must know your best practices and decide which hill you want to die on. it's easy to push back on a marketing team that might want to put in some wordy jargon or marketing speak if you have data to back up why what they're doing is not good for the conversation. So some of this is just having the soft skills, building a relationship with the stakeholders. They need to know that you have the best interest of the product in mind, the best interest of their goals, and that your design will ultimately push towards their goals. And that builds that trust between those departments and you. So it's sometimes it's a just let it go, and sometimes it's a no, that's against best practices, let's do it this way, and have alternatives in place to show them if we do it this way instead, we're going to get this result.
Amanda?
Thank you. Yeah, this is an interesting question. You know, from our perspective at Master of Code, our business goals are creating amazing conversations. And I think conversation designers have the same goal. You want to design something that people want to use over and over again. You want to create experiences that promote retention and containment. And empathy is part of that. So I would say they go hand in hand. We've seen there's so much more success with experiences that offer empathy. All conversational experiences and use cases even should offer a level of empathy. If you want to have that human-like look and feel with your customers, you need to add that in. And people are more likely to speak to people or bots that have that skill. So I would say to everyone, they go hand in hand.
And Sarah?
Keep code iterations in play, which is a little bit different than like customer acquisition and conversion, but we were working to make sure that we were creating a persona that felt natural, conversational flows that felt great, while making sure that like our language was appropriate, empathetic, and didn't ask for things that we couldn't really hold on to. And I think part of what happens for me is I'm part of a team. There's 4 of us and we're each handling a different piece of the pie. I think because we're all in close contact, we're able to prep our partners for what to expect. You have to be willing to compromise a little bit, but I think the hill to go back to what Brenda had said, like the hill that I'm willing to die on is empathetic conversation. Like if it doesn't feel natural, if it doesn't, in our case, further a story, if it doesn't give a pleasurable playing experience, then it doesn't serve our goals, and then we can't serve the client's goals.
All right, and moving along are the grades. For anyone attending that didn't catch this earlier, we had everyone submit questions beforehand. So every one of these are questions directly from you, not from anyone else. So third question, how do you source and manage data of natural conversations? Amanda, do you want to go first, and then Anna?
Sure. So this could be a little bit different for every business. What we do over here at Master of Code, we want to make sure that we store these conversations and we pull data and scrape data and put it into documents that are meaningful for other, business analysts, bot tuners, people like myself as a conversation designer can look at and review. So we use, Google Drive, make sure things are collaborative. What we do on a regular basis is we'll pull conversations from our NLU engines of our clients. We'll put them in what we call user input reports. These are really great. It allows us to see, all the inputs from a user that they put into the bot unprompted. So this isn't about clicking a button or answering, a quick reply, things like that. It's what did they ask to the of the bot unprompted, and then what intent fired, the score, and should any tuning or recommendations should come from that. So that allows us to see, is the bot responding as it should? Is there opportunities for new intents? And, is the confidence score, should that be adjusted in any way? So I would say overall, make sure you're pooling conversations and you're allowing multiple members on your team to look at it. A conversation designer could offer insight just as much as a bot tuner, just as much as a business analyst or any other type of analyst that you may have on your team. So keep it collaborative and pull data regularly and put it in a format that is easy for others to see to make those actionable decisions.
Anna?
So there's kind of two parts to this question in terms of which data the person who asked the question is talking about. There's the analytics aspect, which is what the user is saying, and there's what the system is saying. So what you've determined are the phrases and intents that you've written out that you want your action or skill to say. So there has to be a database. Obviously, you're going to have to connect it to a DB, and that is determined by the stack that you're using and the toolset that you're using, or whatever your developer is using. One common thing that people use in terms of prototyping is Google Sheets. So it is a very common use case for people to use a spreadsheet essentially as a DB. I do not recommend this for a production level voice action or skill because your data is subject to corruption. So I've seen this happen before. And you want to make sure that whatever you're using as essentially like a CMS to manage your conversation flow cannot be just edited by anybody at any point. So collaboration is important, but you also kind of want to lock down that to a certain extent, because if anyone can change what's in there, then and your action is live, then that's going straight to production. And whatever happens in that Excel spreadsheet is going to get spoken out and in someone's Google or someone's Alexa. The second part of this question would be managing the data that you receive from what people say. And it really, again, depends on your tool set. There are a lot of analytical tools that help with this. One of the ones that I like to use is Dashbot. So you can see if the user is anonymous, you can see if it's a repeat user, you can see what they've said, you can hear the recordings, and it actually has the option to redact any personal data that anyone says. So if someone starts like listing out their address, that's going to be protected as well. Yeah.
All right. I often find that writing short descriptions or guidance, which are necessary for conversational interactions, takes me a long time because I'm never sure if it's correct. Do the panel also struggle with this? Micah, would you like to start us off? And then Sarah, and then Brenda?
Question, because yes, I absolutely do recognize this from my own practice. And there's actually two things that I try to do when I'm kind of stuck in a rut. I always try to write with a fellow writer or someone that I can soundboard with, like literally like reading out my dialogue, my content, and see how it sounds. And usually that kind of gets me going again. Another thing I do is make sure that I know who the actual owner of the information is from a business perspective. So that I'm sure that when I make things more conversational, I don't actually lose the proper meaning of what I'm trying to communicate. And finally, there's actually quite a lot of techniques from technical communication and instructional design, for instance, that give you some kind of feeling of how to write this kind of short copy that's usually kind of, service oriented or problem solving oriented. So if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to post some links in the chat for further reference.
Sarah.
Struggle with this. Micah said that absolutely working with a team helps. We're also able to prototype what we build and hear it pretty quickly. So you can often hear where your copy has sort of gone awry. I take some principles from writing for audio, some podcasting lessons when I'm thinking about my guidance, that people acquire information auditorily a little bit different. Brief sentences, ideally like four-ish words, simple phrases, not tons of clauses. And as long as I'm following those principles and then working it out with someone, I find that it's successful. Sometimes you don't know till you hear it. And another thing can be like going in the opposite direction sometimes helps me get to where I need to go. If I give myself one draft where it's everything I want to say, then it becomes much easier for me anyway to edit out like all of the non-essential bits, keep just a touch of flavor in for the persona, and then test it out.
And Sarah, yes, struggling with this. This is a big one. How do you take this complex answer and distill it down into something simple enough to put in an interface where the cognitive load is an issue? So like Micah and Sarah, I also like to role play any kind of preliminary design with either the stakeholders, other designers, anybody who will listen, basically, and try to get some feedback on it. I have to insert tech support topics into my bots pretty frequently. So in general, the strategy I use is I try to hit the high points and try to provide some resources for the rest. For example, like if a user types in to the bot, why can't I connect? Well, that might be one of a dozen things. I'm not going to troubleshoot a dozen things, but here, try this most common fix. Did that work? No. Okay, I have a couple other things to try. Maybe do the top 2 or 3 in a conversation. And then, well, there are a lot of other things that might be causing this. Here's a link to some detailed troubleshooting. So hit the high points, hit that 80-20 rule. See if you can find the small bit that might help the most, and then hand off the rest to a tech support channel.
Thanks, Brenda. All right. Do you design alongside the development process, or do you go deep early into the design? Anna, do you want to start us off there? And then Sarah?
You have to, it's so integrated with design and development. I mean, I don't know the experience of the designers on this panel, but for me, I work really closely with the conversation designers when I build voice experiences, because sometimes they ask me to do things that are just totally impossible, and it's better to have that communication happen early on. It also is dependent on the tools, again, that you're using. I keep saying that, but there's a difference between a custom voice experience where, I'm working for this big client that has their own NLP and I have to integrate with that and build a voice experience from like the ground up, versus building something for Google or building something for Alexa. Like what I am capable of doing is different, and it's important that the conversation designer is aware of that from the beginning and aware of what the restrictions and limitations that exist are.
So I have a little bit of a different perspective. I think that once you're underway, you've got to go back and forth. But I feel like I can't ask someone to build if I haven't given them a map. I think the first phases of design are really important. I think paper testing, role playing, all of that is huge. And then as soon as possible, you want to start. I work on a platform that allows me to plug things in and prototype immediately. Like I can play it and hear it, like in a beta. And that helps me do the design as I continue. But I have to have a roadmap. I have to know my happy paths. I have to have some semblance of like where I expect to require air handling. I need to know where I'm going. And I think even before that, like the persona design has to be, for what we build, we need a really strong, fun persona usually. And we have to make sure that we've figured out where we're headed before we start to actually technically plug stuff in.
Brenda, do you want to go next? And then Micah?
Yeah, I always design first and then develop. Otherwise, it's really hard to keep track of what goes where in the flows. Right now, I'm doing my own bot development in a tool that requires, it's limited to no coding, but it still gets squirrely if I don't know what the flow is. Like Sarah said, what the map is. So having that design to fall back on is super helpful.
Was it my turn, Brielle? I'm not quite sure whether. Yeah, thank you. For me, as for everybody else on the panel, it depends. But usually, what I really like is to just take a software development approach and start with a common refinement session where we identify the use case that we want to tackle, and straight away dive into both the business requirements and the technical requirements and limitations and constraints that may be there. And I do find that if I'm working on a more like a conversational kind of service content bot, then I can basically make my own plan. But still, even then, I do plan to I model upfront things like the entities you're going to use, how they relate to each other, a bit of domain mapping so that you actually know the scope of the domain that your bot is going to handle. That's something that's typically, or that's really nice to do actually with the entire team so that you get all the different perspectives. So again, yeah, it depends.
All right. Are there any examples of conversational experiences that have contributed to humanitarian design in some way? For example, the coronavirus COVID information bots that many governments have used during the crisis. Sarah, do you want to start us off? And then Micah, do you want to go next?
Maybe took the back half of that. So I'm going to pass if that's okay.
Start that off.
Organization COVID-19 chatbot for me has been a picture-perfect example of how to get your bot right without necessarily being completely conversational or AI-driven. What WHO did, they provided the basic content set, like the content canon, that has been copied in basically any other COVID-19 bot. And they did it really early on in the pandemic. They made sure it was always up to date. And especially they made sure that it was accessible for everybody around the entire world. So they choose a very basic IVR system that could also be used with phones that might not have like smartphone capabilities. They made it offline so you could use it in areas where there's no coverage, especially in large parts of Africa. That's quite a challenge. They made it available in a lot of languages. And they kept maintaining it kudos for them. I think they did a brilliant job on it.
Micah?
Reached 4.2 billion people. Forgot to say that, but I mean, wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. Brenda, do you want to go? And then Anna, do you want to follow Brenda?
Thanks. Yeah, I'll take the first part and Sarah can take the second part. Yay. I was really lucky enough to be working at a company that makes work from home software of all kinds. So we were in a really unique position to have extended trials for essential workers and things like that, like nonprofits and healthcare and government entities and whatever. So building out a flow in really, really fast to make sure that that kind of thing was handled in a chatbot. And it came out, it was super successful because people were asking, they would just say, I'm a church. Can you help me? With what? And so we were able to handle the NLU and recognition and say, oh, this is probably somebody asking about the COVID project that we're doing. So let's go ahead and, put them into that flow. And it explained a little bit about how the plan worked and asked them a few questions to see if they were, where they were in the process, and got them to the right people and got them to the right teams. And it worked like a charm. I mean, it was very simple, very clear, and just jumped right into it. And it's something we're really proud of.
Thanks for sharing. Anna, you want to finish this one up?
There are a few voice experiences that I like that you can check out depending on your region. The first one is called breastfeeding friend. So you can listen to that if you're in the UK or if you're in Canada. And I think this is such a great experience for voice, or a great example of voice experience that works really well, because it's essentially a guide for how to breastfeed, and it walks you through the steps when you're doing, and it's hands-free because you need your hands to be performing the breastfeeding, obviously. So I think it's such a great experience. The UX is amazing, and it's an action that you can check out because it's live. The second one is available if you're in Canada, which is called Recycling Buddy. So that is something that you can ask, like, I have this bottle, can I recycle it? I have this thing, can I recycle it? And it helps you kind of understand how to sort whatever you have. And it recognizes a lot of different types of stuff. And it also has a little bit of sass. So it's very funny in explaining the best ways to recycle for you.
Thinking from a comms perspective, if you're building a chatbot, it's figuring out how to get a voice version of that. If you're and that'll bring in your visually impaired people. If you've got people who are not able to hear your voice experience, then as the ability to turn a headless experience into an experience that has some visuals in it, it's important to think about what's key to communicate. I think the future is that my hope, I think, is that voice experiences and visual experiences will start to meld a little bit, so that if you can't access information on a screen, you're getting it given to you auditorily, and if you can't get it via voice, you're seeing that example. As for people who access information in different ways, for people who maybe are a little bit of a slow learner, I think making sure to keep your conversations simple and direct. Like, I'm not designing I'm not designing interfaces for banks and companies like that. Like, we're doing storytelling very often, and it's really thinking about who we anticipate designing the story for, who our users are, and making sure that we're considering. We usually build like 3 sample user personas so that we can really think about, like, how might this person need to address this information? Am I speaking to them? Are they going to get it? So I think being thoughtful about the design is a really important way to make conversations accessible.
Okay, we are going to go back a little bit to what programs or tools are widely used in the space that we should familiarize ourselves with. Micah, do you want to start, and then Anna, you can follow?
Indeed, there's this prototyping environment that supports my language as well. It's called Botmock. So yeah, I definitely recommend that one. Other than that, there's a whole bunch of tools that I use. My favorites being, like probably everybody's, the flowchart and Excel or spreadsheet combination. I also tend to use mind map tools a lot because of the upfront modeling that I want to do. And I usually, when I define entities, I like to make little taxonomies out of them, so little categories with values. And for that, a mind mapping tool is just really great because it gives you the structure and the freedom at the same time. Same goes for domain modeling when you want to kind of have a high-level overview of all the topics that are relevant to your domain. Mind mapping, wonderful. You can share it, you can edit it. So that's that. Really
Do you have
a nice
specific mind mapping tools that you use?
I don't know if I'm allowed to actually mention names, but I'll do it anyway. Xmind for me is perfect. Lucidchart for flowcharting. And just any Google Sheet or Excel doc, whatever your company or your environment supports best. One specific tool that I use a lot because I write in Dutch and I design in Dutch is SSML, to get the pronunciation of my Dutch Google Assistant right. Because common names in Dutch, but also common words tend to get mispronounced quite often. So I have to SSML my way around them, and it's a lot of fun. But so yeah, I use mainly Google Assistants or the Google Action SSML editor that's there to prototype. That's it, I think. Yeah, that's my list.
Yeah, so there are 2 that I really like to use. One is Miro board. It used to be called Real-Time Board. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that, but that's really good for visualizing how the flows are going to go. It's usually what a designer will hand me. And then in terms of prototyping, I like VoiceFlow a lot, and I think that they keep releasing new features that continue to make it amazing to prototype and develop. So that's definitely one that I would check out.
Thanks, Anna. All right, is there a skill or technique you thought you would use a lot but actually haven't? And Amanda, this one's for you.
Thanks. So I'll answer it a little bit differently. I thought going into this, it was all about UX and copywriting, and I'd be set, build out those user journey flows, build a bot persona, write it out, define what that is, build your flow charts or your conversation maps, and do testing, and you're done. But a skill that I am doing so much of that I didn't think I would need is research and data analytics. Being in this role for about 2 years, there's been so many instances where clients have come to us and they want a conversational solution and they have the use cases in mind. And, looking at data, that might not be the best way moving forward. Current state in an automated solution might just be as efficient as it is at that moment, or where it currently is, that experience currently is. Are people currently talking about this use case today? If they're not, why are they suddenly going to talk to a bot about it? And is there data to support that users would be willing to talk to a bot about it, depending on what the use case is? So we now, before any start of any design or any conversational build project, we want to make sure that there's data to support and validate the use case that we're designing for. So like I said, I thought it was just, UX copywriting principles, good to go. But before we start any of that, we deep dive into data and we validate those use cases and design from there.
Brenda, do you want to start us off with this one? How important is it to come in with a proficiency in a programming language like Python? How much programming experience is typically required in your line of work?
This depends on precisely what you're being asked to do. Anna's doing a lot more coding than I am, but I found it useful to have at least working knowledge in at least one programming language, even if it's just so that it's easier to talk to the dev team in their own language. And to tie in also to Anna was saying before, when you're asking the dev team to build you something, it's nice to know the level of difficulty. You don't want to ask them like, I want to go to the moon, and not know what that entails. And you're asking them to do something that's going to take 6 months of heavy duty work. And when you think it might be easy, having knowledge of a programming language, any language, will help you to understand the scope of what you're asking.
Yeah, so I agree. I agree with what Brenda said. And what I meant before in terms of like design and development being so integrated at the beginning is mostly to prevent having to go back and do rework. So you do have to understand to a degree just how everything works under the hood, so that you're not asking a developer to do something that's like literally impossible, because then it's just going to create more work for you, because they're going to say, I can't do that, and then you have to go back. So you have to know just basically how the data structures work and what's possible. And then in addition to that, I would say you have to know the arena that you're working within. So what can I do in Alexa? What can I do in Google? What can I do in Cortana? Things like that, just so you have an idea of what your limitations and stuff are. Again, it's really just to avoid you being told that's not possible and then having to go back to the drawing board. In terms of knowing like something like Python or something, I think now there are lots of tools that are making it really easy to do no code solutions. So I wouldn't say like you should be scared, oh my God, I don't know how to code, I'm never going to be able to do this. Like that's not true at all. I think there's lots of tools that can get you from point A to point B. And again, it depends on the complexity of what you're building. If you're just building a basic skill or like a quiz, let's say, that's not that complicated. You can use a no-code tool. And sometimes that is what a client wants because it's their first time they're dipping their toes into voice and they just kind of want to get an idea for how their users would interact with their brand. And maybe they just want something super simple. So you don't need to learn how to code for that. The more complex it gets, the more you want to be able to understand the structure of the conversation and the data and how that actually translates into what you want to do, because some things can be really complex. But I wouldn't worry too much about not knowing exactly how like JavaScript works or how Node works or something like that. And don't be intimidated, I guess is what I'm saying.
Sarah, you want to take it from here?
People using a publishing tool. I have no coding experience. I wish that I did. And I think that certain things would be much, much easier if I did. But we have a great publishing partner. So that tool is easy enough for me to use, though I do have a game design partner who tends to handle more of the dev side. So it is possible to be in this space. The language that I found most helpful to me was all of my playwriting skills. And oddly, I found things that I learned in school for theater to be really transferable on the conversation side. I am having to pick things up otherwise, as prior speakers have said. Like I don't have the capacity to speak to a dev necessarily right off the bat in terms that will make development sense. So it's helpful to acquire it. I wish that I had, but there is room for you. If you are like me and your skills are sort of softer, there's still room to participate in this and to use those tools that are available. The one I use enables me to plug in anywhere I want.
And Micah, you want to finish this question up?
I think that most importantly, it's to understand the logic of a chatbot. So for me, no, I don't think you necessarily need to be able to program in a programming language, but you need to kind of have the common language, not only to talk to your devs, but also to design logical flows for your chatbot. So as soon as you start working with something like entities and slot filling, you're already kind of entering the mind of a programmer in the sense that you're using the same kind of logical thinking that's necessary to make this work. And in that sense, a chatbot is in a way an application that you're designing rather than a piece of content only. So yeah, your analytical skills and your language skills know how to ask the proper questions. And that is something that typically content people and designer people and theater people are much better in. So no, programming languages, not necessarily. It's nice though. I mean, it's fun. Just try it and have a laugh.
All right. How essential is a bot's gender and whether it reveals that it's a human or a bot? How does this affect the user journey? And what are the things we need to keep in mind when we design for such experiences? Amanda, do you want to start this one off?
Sure. Gender in AI has been, it's becoming more and more of a bigger discussion. First part of the question, should you reveal if it's a human or a bot? Absolutely. You can never go wrong with being transparent, and you need to align the user's expectation when they are interacting with the conversational solution. In terms of, whether it should have a gender or not, I typically, design, if it's a brand, you have brand _S virtual assistant, right? It's a brand virtual assistant. If that brand has a mascot or a character that's really core to their brand, then it definitely can make sense that you would want to take that character and that gender and put it in a chatbot or a voice bot. Gender, of course, comes more into play when you're designing for voice. And what I will say is, in every other aspect of our lives, there's such a push for diversity. There's a push for diversity in government, in media, in TV and movies. And, the same push for diversity should also be in AI, especially in voice. We've seen a lot of assistants, they're defaulted to female genders. There's also a binary gender solution, or sorry, voice solution out there, which is good. And I encourage everyone in the industry, you know, to push for diversity. Let's get a multitude of different experiences out there.
Thank you, Amanda. Brenda, do you want to answer next? And then Sarah, would you like to finish this question?
Sure. There's a decent amount of research being done around male versus female, which one is more effective. And really the short answer is it depends. It depends on your branding, depends on your persona that you've built. It depends on the energy that you want on your system. So like I had a customer once that like on a voice system, well, we want a female voice talent. Okay, what, Kathleen Turner? Roseanne Barr? There's a whole, with the range of female voices is as large as humanity itself. So let's narrow it down. What do you want your persona to be? And what if that persona turns out to be, oh, you know what, a male voice would actually work better for this. So you really have to, it just comes down to the actual persona you want to convey. If that's male, fine. Female, fine. Weird little robot icon, fine. Cartoon, fine. As long as it fits your persona, you should be fine.
And Sarah.
If it's a human or a bot. And I think that is especially important because Boom designs experiences that feature human voices. So at some point along the way, I have to give you some indication that this is, you're hearing a human, but you're talking to a bot. As far as gender, I think we have to push back on rigid ideas about gender and binary ideas about gender. And I think one of the things that has concerned, one of the things that has concerned me is how many assistants have female voices. And that I think just replicates an inequity in our society. And I think, so I want to push back on why we're making assumptions that things need to sound like. I'm completely flailing right now. I don't think that a bot's gender is necessarily like, it has to be this or it has to be that. I think that Brenda handled it beautifully. Like, it really depends on what the persona is and what is called for. But I do think it's important to question like unconscious bias, to question internal biases, to know to question a little bit why we're making assumptions or why we're deciding that this bot should be a woman and that bot should sound like a man. And also we need to start thinking about what non-binary voices might sound like, because that is also, that needs to be addressed. People need to be represented there as well.
Thank you, Sarah. What would you say is the most important field of knowledge a conversational designer needs to master? And Sarah, do you want to take this one?
Fail. Like, if you are a perfectionist, it is super hard. So developing your own capacity to sit in discomfort and be wrong about things, and then to go learn and iterate, which isn't a specific field, but it's like having a thirst for knowledge is the best thing you can do. Knowing how to, and being a resourceful researcher, as Amanda was saying earlier, is so important, not only in the building of things, but in the learning how to build the things.
Thank you, Sarah. And we are still under time. Is there anything else, panelists, would you like to share anything else while we still have a couple minutes left?
Is that a kosher thing? Am I allowed to drop the link to our new Alexa skill?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So we built Mood Magic to be a dance party. We're trying to find a way to keep kids active, like without screens necessarily. And this is a DJ, it's a dance party. It's an emotional EQ opportunity for children, I think aged 5 to 7. We would love people to kick the tires and let us know what you think. And thanks for being so welcoming. It's one of my first
Of
panels.
course. Thank you for joining. Amanda, did you want to jump in and make an amend to that, the gender question that we were discussing earlier? I just saw your note in the chat.
Sure. I said, yeah, I made a mistake. I said binary, I meant non-binary, and I was referring to the genderless voice assistant called Q, which is, check it out. If you could just YouTube Q and have a play. And it's just another great example of, you know, what people are building out there to, you know, again, add that diversity to the field.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. All right. Thank you all so much for the conversation. This was really, really fun. And thank you, attendees, for joining us. Really appreciate it. If this session inspired you to go try out designing or developing conversation, you can use this promo code, BM Webinar, for a month free of the Teams tier Botmock. So we really appreciate you sticking around the whole time and would love to hear feedback on the session. Feel free to connect with me or the others on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. And cannot thank you enough for sharing your time with us today. So I'm going to stick around in case there's any questions coming into the chat still. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day or evening, whatever time of day it is for you.